if yeah, Leah's saying she has consent. If you don't, if you're like, I can't, I don't want to, I'm nervous, then keep your camera off and mute yourself. And you can even change your name tile and say, I'm mystery person. But we are starting today of the first of a conversation, and I have a brave UK practitioner who agreed to say yes. And I should tell you the background story, a short background story is that I learned of Kathryn through a network weaver in the UK, Kate Pound, who shared some work that she was doing with us, with this, a bunch of network weavers related to using story and public narrative. And when I said, "Oh, I want to know more," she said, "You should talk to Kathryn Perera. Perera, is that how you say your last name?" Thanks, darling.
That's right. Yeah, Perera.
Perera. I'll try to roll my R's. And so Kathryn said yes. And then I actually said, "Oh, and by the way, would you mind if I invite a whole bunch of people? Some of them I know and some of them I don't." And she didn't run away. So that tells me something about her, which is tremendous, because it means that she's willing to just be herself and to share what she knows and to have a little bit of fun and trust that, like, we only have good intentions and wishes for doing good work in the world. So that's the plan today. I'll show you the agenda now. We're going to do this little bit of opening. We have 1 more minute of opening. And then we're going to shift to an interview. Might be a little bit more of a fancy, formal way, but like in some ways, I'll ask everyone to turn their screen off, and Kathryn Perera and I will chat about this topic that I have heard through the grapevine has heart and meaning to her. And so she'll talk to me about that. And you'll be able to also add at any point insights into the chat that you have or questions that you have. You'll also then have time in individual and in pairs and in small groups to reflect more on what you heard Kathryn and I say. And there may be questions that may come up. There may be like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited because that fits with this. Like, anything is okay. There's no wrong thing. There's no wrong. We're all practitioners here. And then we'll come back and we'll kind of look through, Kathryn and I, Perera and I will look through some of the questions and we'll see, ooh, is there a juicy one question, or are there a few questions that seem kind of nestled together that we might hear a little bit more about from her. But Kathryn has the mic today as the celebrity, but any of you could be sitting in the same chair. As I said, I'm already recruiting some of you to sit in this chair in the future. And what I mean by this chair is that we're trying to learn from the periphery. And so in a network, you have the core, this is a network map. You have what's in the middle, the people who see each other regularly in meetings or at the grocery store or on projects. But what's equally important for a network is what's on the edges. And those are the people who aren't in our everyday sphere, but they know stuff. And they either know stuff like, oh my gosh, they're doing the same thing in another country, or they're doing the same thing in a different sector, or they're using some really cool ways of thinking about their work. So this conversation today and a monthly conversation that will happen the last week of every month will be around learning from the periphery so we can grow our understanding, grow our relationships. And so with that, I'm gonna say a few things, and then I'm gonna turn this off, Kathryn Perera, and then we can just chat. And you can also, you can also fill in some details that I may have missed in the setup. So this is this amazing woman. You see her on the slide and you see her on the screen. Like a good network weaver, I just scanned the internet when somebody told me like, oh, this woman's super interesting. And she has an incredible bio, which you should read about. She leads something called the Horizons team, and you'll see in this also cool sketch notes what Horizons team does in the United Kingdom, right? They help people own what they create. So it's something about like, ooh, the way we get to good and better outcomes is by involving people, that real change takes real work. So that means you can't just think about it. You got to like I don't know, do the sit-ups. You got to get sweaty and dirty. The people who do the change, who do the work, do the change. So again, it goes back to that, like we want to be centered ourselves and notice what we're noticing, notice where we're focusing, because that makes all the difference. What we choose to not focus on or what we choose to focus on. And then a lot of Kathryn's work is more connecting the system, which she can talk about, to the system itself. But the thing I would say that stood out in her bio, of all the things that you can read about if you search her like I did, is that she's the mum, M-U-M, of 2 children. And I know for me, there's no better practice space than my family practice space and parenting my children. Am I creating the kind of exchanges, the kind of interaction? Am I listening in a way that allows my children to come into their fullness? So that was the most important thing on your bio, Kathryn. And I'm curious now, as I turn this off, if there's anything you want to add, or do you want to say anything about the Horizon team before I turn this off?
No, I think that's helpful. I want to attribute this, Kristen, if I may, to
Yeah.
Myron Rogers. So Myron is a complexity thinker in the UK, and he's known for Myron's maxims, or heuristics, or rules of thumb. And these are some of his rules of thumb or maxims that we use in our work. So that's where this comes from. We are a tiny team. There's 26 of us, which may not sound so tiny, but in a workforce of 1.3 million in the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, it is small, but beautifully formed as a team. And Kristen, what you've outlined are the principles that we work with. And I'm happy if it's useful to kind of go into a bit more about what we do and how it informs what we do and why we do it.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm most interested in, again, the chat is quiet, which is totally fine, but I really encourage you, this is the messy practitioner part. This isn't a webinar. I mean, you could treat it as a webinar, but feel free, those of you that have used Sketchnotes, to put in things about Sketchnotes or Myron Rogers. Feel free to start putting in connections to each other, either to Horizon team or Kathryn. Only good stuff. If you have a beef, don't put it in the chat because that will make me sad. Only kindness here. And you can feel free a little bit about your work, where you are and what of those principles resonates for you. What I'm most interested, Kathryn, is really the way I first learned about you through Kate Pound was and this is where you can correct me, but or your team's decision to try to really focus on how do we help leaders tell their story, and who do you mean by leaders? And you chose this very specific framework, which you also did a super cool sketch note about that I just found last night. It's amazing what happens when you start searching around on the internet. But I would really love, if you're willing, the topic of this conversation is like using stories to influence public narrative and social change. So why in you or this tiny team of 26 trying to help other leaders understand the narrative they're living in, understand the narrative they want, and change, work towards, build skills to work towards that? Like, what was in it for you around this framework? And it might be you want to say a little bit more about the framework that this is, and I can put a citation in as you're talking.
Yeah, thank you. So again, I want to accredit the your being a plural, you are, which is Lee Kendall, a member of our team who produced this sketch note. And if I'm going to add to that I'm going to add a man called Marshall Gantz, who practices public narrative, teaches it out of the Kennedy School at Harvard. And if I add to the I'm going to add in the Rabbi Hillel the Elder, who in the 1st century BC is the first person that we know who wrote this down. So that's some of the origins. And there are lots of women, men, people whom I could include in the U beyond that. But the principle of public narrative that you see, Kristen, just briefly explain it, and maybe actually use a story from the Rabbi Hillel. So the story is 2,000 years old, and the story goes like this. The rabbi, who was a very revered rabbi, as I understand it from Marshall, working in Jerusalem, The story is that he was approached by a group of his congregation, and the congregants said, "Rabbi, how do we know how we should be in the world?" And he answered with 3 questions, which as an Irish Catholic is very similar to how priests tend to answer questions, more questions. So his 3 questions to the question, how do I know how to be in the world? His answer was this: if I am not for myself, then who will be for me? If I am not for myself, then who will be for me? And I've come to understand that as a self-regarding question, not a selfish question, but a question that asks us to think deeply if we are going to presume to lead, to ask other people to come with us and make something happen in conditions of uncertainty, with everything that they stand to risk in doing that. I better make sure that I understand what motivates me, not functionally, but deeply, self-interest, properly understood. Why I do what I do, why I don't do what I don't do. What are the moments, the experiences? You see this in the sketch note, the choices, the elements of what I've lived that explain my values, that show my values. So there's a story about me, a story of self. And the story goes that the rabbi gave a second question. Remember, there were 3 questions. And the second question was, if I am for myself alone, then what am I? If I am for myself alone, then what am I? And I understand this as a relational question, because for us to be who we are, not what, but who, to be people, we are in relationship with each other. And one of the reasons Chris and I wanted to be here today is because spaces where we can connect and be in relationship with each other is, for me, what it's sort of all about, right? So that question is a story of us. That's the central piece of the framework. So the rabbi said, there's a story of you. Help other people to get you by communicating the values that inform who you are and how you act in the world. Do that in a way that's expansive, that creates a story of us. What are we asking people to do with us? What are we calling on them to be part of? And then the rabbi's third of 3 questions: if not now, when? If not now, when? And you'll see that in Lee's sketch note, she reframes that through the words of Martin Luther King, who said that we need as leaders to capture the fierce urgency of now. And I understand this to mean that change is partly constructed. You know, it's not just a process that's happening around us. It's through narrative that we have the ability to articulate a wrong, a pain, an injustice, and ask people, not at some point in the future, but now, to take action with us. So the basis of the public narrative framework that the Rabbi Hillel and Marshall and others have outlined is how we connect these 3 elements: stories about ourselves, the self, and how we connect with others so that that us can take action now on things that are urgent. And it's used in community organizing, it's used in political campaigning, it's instrumentalized, sometimes for good, sometimes for ill. But I think at its basic, it's fantastically helpful for thinking about the emotional resources that we have in leadership and how we start to influence and create spaces and opportunities for people to work with us, especially when we don't have a mandate for change. This is about shared purpose, using our emotional resources as an object, not something that has us, something that we're subject to, but something that we can hold up, think about, and then use with others to create a bigger sense of us. And that's what I see in the framework, Kristen.
I am picking up on what you talked about in terms of being anchored in emotion. and also thinking about how do we as leaders or change makers not get carried away by the larger emotions of the majority, so can you speak a little bit, I guess, in this framework, and as a practitioner personally, or as you see other people practice, what is the importance, why connect to your own emotion and value set?
So I guess working in a complex, large health system where, the myth is that we've been able to get things done for decades, years and decades by process, by being well organized. That's the sort of dominant myth, the dominant story. And that no longer works, and that's breaking down. And I do use the word myth because I think there's quite a lot of myth around it. I think in reality, the way so much work gets done to affect positive change is by us being able to move others to work with us, even when the conditions are uncertain, to make a change. And if you think about the root of the word movement, we talk about films that moved us, music that moves us, movement, motion, emotion. Movement and emotion have the same root, right? They share a similar property. In other words, it's by connecting at the level of emotion rather than purely with the head or purely with the hands, the thinking and the strategy, that we're able to create space where we can see new possibilities. And I think the other thing I would say is trust, so relationships tend to move at the speed of trust. Very hard for us to build trust with other people absent some connection to underlying values, so that I get you, you get me at some level that again goes beyond the head and the hands. I see this framework as a really useful, my mentor, a woman called Helen, often says, all models are wrong, but some of them are useful. So, it's wrong, and I think it's useful. Very simple, but what it's essentially saying is there are skills, ways of thinking about how we build relationships in public that can be learned as a practice that help to ground in emotion and values the work that we're trying to do together.
That's really helpful. I'm curious, and again, people can feel free to be putting things in chat. I'm trying to respond to some things in chat and telling people that I need to listen fully to you, Kathryn. We have a couple more questions, and then we'll go into some reflection and pair small group time. But I'm curious then, the other thing, with the fierce urgency of now, the world's on fire, and we feel like, we need to move fast, or maybe just move strategically. So I'm curious about this notion of the framework as a skill building tool, and how you've seen that it's not just about, I love this Helen Bevins quote about all models are wrong, some are useful. So how is the framework? It's not the framework, it's maybe the practice that comes as you start to, cultivate, like, okay, I want to be able to tell my story. I want to be able to mobilize others in a particular direction. So can you speak to the, why the skill piece is so important, and maybe patience with just knowing, like, if storytelling isn't something that comes naturally to you, I tend to like turn to my grandfather or turn to certain people in community meetings and say, can you tell the story? But I'd be curious if you could just speak a little bit about, what's your own wisdom around why a framework that invites skill building over time is an essential way to support individuals and bring groups together.
My belief is that most of us are natural storytellers. What I mean by that is we are hardwired, most of us. And I say most of us because some of my collaborators who are neurodiverse have helped me to understand that it isn't always the case. But most people are hardwired for storytelling. We are born to be able not just to receive the data, but to make sense of that data, to construct realities, narratives that help us to use that data in relationship with our experience. And yet we forget how to do that. We forget that that is a practice that, much like other skills, public speaking or whatever analytical skills, there's a muscle that can learn through confidence and courage to become effective at telling stories. And I think what's different about public narrative, by which I mean the combination of a story of self and a story of us and a story of now, it's not simply storytelling. It's designed to be used in public to build public relationships in order that we can then take action together. So it's a skill that's a launching pad to be able to take action with others. Oftentimes when I'm working with it, facilitating it as a practitioner or teaching it, people love to talk about the exercise. They love to talk about the framework. And when you push them to jump in and start practicing, it can feel very unsafe, very unsure. But in essence, that's how you build it, like a muscle. Marshall Gantz often uses the analogy of a bicycle. Do you learn it by reading Bicycology? Do you learn it by kind of studying other people? Like, no, right? You get on the bicycle, and then what happens? I took my daughter out to the park yesterday. What happens? She falls off. And then she has a choice. She goes home with her bike, or she stands up, she gets back on, and she does it again. And it's that practice that creates the possibility for us to improve as storytellers. And I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen many times.
Beautiful. So we may come back and want to hear more of what you've seen, but I do want to give people a chance to actually do a little bit of reflection on their own. And I'm going to put a link in. So if you reflect, this is a Google shared notes doc. So I'm going to put it in the chat now.
I'm also loving Caroline's comment. Thank you, Caroline, for that.
Yeah, feel free to. You can be looking at the chats while I'm doing this notes link.
Yeah. So Caroline, you're saying that in your experience, authenticity makes all the difference. Yes, absolutely. Not instrumentalizing. I mean, it's always my nervousness about talking about this subject, because it can be interpreted as marketing or public relations. And of course, many of the elements of public narrative have been slightly controversial, but I'll say my view, have been co-opted for other purposes. Whereas in essence, it's a democratic practice. It's a practice of how we build relationship, how we contest, how we find common ground and find difference in public relationships, and authenticity is key to that. Caroline, I don't know if you want to say anything more. I can see you nodding.
Yeah, no, it's been my experience. And if I tune into my body, like I was at a meeting a couple of weeks ago where something was said that really did not sit with me. And I knew if I didn't kind of respond to it in a very gentle but real way, that actually I wouldn't have any ease in myself. So that was around me being authentic, even though there was a risk involved in doing that, because sometimes we say things and they're not well received.
Yes.
But we have to be true to who we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful. Caroline, will you say where you're from?
I'm from Ireland, from Dublin.
Beautiful. Yeah. This is a global, this is a UK, US little space to chat. I'm sorry, were you going to say something, Kathryn? And
I was just going to say that Caroline had prompted for me that the key word for me in it is alongside narrative is public, because what sits with authenticity is this does require us to do personal work, to think about our own experiences, but it's not about private information, private stories. It's that difference between personal and private. It's the difference between prying and probing. this does require us to sort of probe into and connect with our own experiences, emotions, and think, why do I do that? What is that? Why do I believe, against all the rational odds, that this is the right course? And then practice offering those stories to others, so the authenticity sits alongside the personal, Caroline, is what I was thinking while you were speaking.
Beautiful. All right, so welcome Talitha. I think she had a little trouble getting in, so settle yourself. You will hear in just mere moments what we've been chatting about. What we're going to do is take really about the next 10 to 15 minutes, and I would invite you to think about just what already has been bubbling up in you. So what excites you about what you've heard, what aligns with what you believe, what resonates. Some of you, Leslie Goodburn's already been sharing, oh my goodness, I use this. She might have been the second person, Kathryn Perera, after I asked one person about you, then Leslie's like, public narrative, absolutely, do it 150%. So I'm like, oh, people are loving this. So think about what excites you, what questions you have. And if you're able to put this in the shared notes, I see, look at all of you are in there. So for those of you that don't use shared notes, don't stress. But in a collaborative space, what's nice is that you can start literally kind of typing in things that you haven't had a chance to connect with each other about. Who are you? And then here's your question. So what excites you? You put your name in the first column. There we go. Anonymous Sheep is putting her name in, Leslie. Yeah, what excites you and what questions do you have? So I would ask that we take a minute for people to just collect their thoughts personally. And Rita is going to start pairing people to then, after the first minute, to go into pairs. There's no pressure. You can share whatever you want. You can just ask about where are you living? Where do you call home? And what's the weather like? It's not up to, we're not the boss of you today. So do what's nourishing. But I'm hoping something you've heard so far might be nourishing. And then we'll go into fours and continue to explore, all right, what's coming up for us? Kathryn Perera and I will be watching the Google Doc fill, and that's how when we come back for the closing 15 minutes, we'll try to pick up on themes that we hear and open it up for more a whole group conversation or lifting certain people's voice in the room, as Kathryn did with Caroline. So I have my little timer, because if I didn't set a timer, I would lose my marbles, which we don't want to do. And so take the next minute. You can turn your camera off if you'd like, or keep it on, and make some notes to yourself. I would love it if you made them. Great, Elizabeth and Leslie are doing it there, because that's what Kathryn Perera and I will use. So Kathryn, why don't you go ahead, Perera, why don't you go ahead and turn your camera off? I'm going to turn mine off. We'll let people work. And I'll come back on with my camera when 1 minute is up.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. All right, darling. So you can set your doodle note down or your pen down. Stop, give your hands a stretch. And again, now Rita, by the magic of Zoom, will move you into a random pair. since you may very likely not know each other, or if people like Rita are like, oh my gosh, I missed the whole first part, then you can just start sharing. Whoever was part of the first part can share first. And it's like short and sweet. Connect with each other, generate ideas based on what's come up from you so far, and you'll just have a little couple minutes through that, and then we'll move you into bigger groups. Have fun. I encourage you to turn your video on if you can, so you can build relationships. Building relationships helps all this work happen. It's the connective tissue. So go ahead, Rita, and move us along.
You got it. I am working on that now.
If you forget the questions, you can open up the chat. I'll post them in the chat again. But be yourself, have fun. Also, if you're new to Zoom, you'll have to hit yes to move to a pair.
Where is the yes question? Oh, it's come up now. Okay, that's fine.
We'll open. Letha, can you hear me?
you know, Saturday, middle of the day. And, you know, there's somebody just sitting there with an acoustic guitar, singing softly and playing in a way that's, you know, everybody can shop and do what they feel they need to do.
Yep. I think we're
And
back now into the big room.
okay.
Yay!
I would love to be able, I've never done Zoom on my phone, and I would love to be able to figure out how to get my video so you can see I'm a real person.
Letha, you stay afterwards if you can, or you text me and I'll help you with that if you'd like.
Okay, beautiful.
Yeah. So welcome back, everybody. I think I was going to have you go into fours, and part of me wonders, because there was so much good chat in the questions. I'm going to look a little bit to Kathryn to see if she feels like there's good stuff. We might just want to stay as a whole because we only have another 15. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to, like, as I say that, if people are like mad at me because you're like, I wanted to be with 2 other people, like, feel free to just use that chat or do the follow-up and say, you know, I want to connect with some other folks. But Kathryn, let's look at that. Are you looking at the Google question?
I am, yeah.
Now? So maybe I'm going to let you, since I don't have that screen open, maybe if there's something that jumps out for you that you feel like might be, this is like, this work is like acupuncture. Right? There's 1,000 questions, but you want to find what's the question that might release the most energy for those of us gathered. So if there's something there that you're seeing, or a cluster of questions that kind of speaks to something, why don't you share a little bit? Or if you want to draw people out like you did with Caroline, and we'll do that for 10 minutes or so.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's lots of great questions and thoughts and ideas. I'm glad that some of it resonates with people. I'm seeing, Sabrina, your question, how can I help others connect with their self-interest? So I thought maybe I should say a few words about that. So first thing is, when I used that phrase self-interest, what did I mean? So de Tocqueville was a philosopher in the late 18th century, and he came from France via the UK to America. And when he got to America, he wrote about what he found, and what he saw was a fledgling experiment, which is still ongoing, with democratic principles. And he said one of the things that was most striking was the amount of small community associations that he saw springing up in America. So people coming together around what he called their self-interest properly defined. And what he meant by that, he explained, was not what drives me selfishly or what I want to accomplish, but what motivates me that is connected with my values, the contribution that I want to make in the world, the things that explain why I do what I do, why I don't do what I don't do, right? So I work as a practitioner from a basis that change starts with me. And if I want to do, Sabrina, to your question, how do I start working with other people to better understand their self-interest? If I want to do that work, I need to start with myself and think, what are the moments, the experiences that explain why I do this work? Oftentimes it links back to foundational experiences, formative, perhaps your family, friendships, things that happened in the first few years of life. Maybe not. But thinking back, who brought me to this work? Who reached out, took my hand, and inspired me to keep going despite this work being difficult? And really starting to ask those questions of ourselves, I believe, is the first step towards being able to create some capacity to help others to ask those questions in a way that is generative and constructive and exploratory. And then when we come to that question about how do I maybe coach people in their stories and to really create effective stories, often what I've learned we're looking for are choice points. So listening for the points in people's stories where they've made a choice, and they may not even see it themselves. They could have done this or that, and they chose this path. Why? Why did you do that? I'm interested in that. I'm curious about why you chose that, because it's those inflection points that tell us a lot about each other's agency, our ability to make things happen, right? So listening out for choice points and helping people to see their choice points and hold them up to the light, almost like a mirror, and think, what was that about? What does that tell me about the way that I am in the world, the way that I choose to lead? And that's often the most effective, I find, coaching strategy for gently supporting people to unlock their public narrative, to move from being able to describe their experiences to being able to craft those into stories that inspire others to want to act with them. So there's a little bit about self-interest, Kristen.
I'm curious, there's a theme that it's tied in the question, and it speaks to rural, and I think it could fit in any rural context, but it's this idea of, I'm reading Trish's question, so you can come off and restate it. Maybe, is Trish here? Maybe you could just share it yourself. I'm looking quick to see.
Yes.
Awesome.
So I live in a very rural, very needy area.
Mm-hmm.
And oh my goodness, there's a handful of people that work and try really, really hard to make a difference out here. But it's just so difficult. It's very cliquish. You either have the folks that, oh, we don't want those folks, or we're not going to help those folks. And then you have those folks who can't help themselves. And it's very difficult. You just find yourself running in circles and chasing your tail.
Yeah. Thanks, Trish. So I'm wondering, Kathryn, if that's the situation that she's experiencing, how might using story or using this kind of framework help amplify certain voices and or address power differentials that are long-standing, and especially in certain communities that are a little bit, the word she used was click, right? So
yeah. Oh, these are great questions. Kristen, I think, and Trish, I think we could have a whole day, a whole hour exploring kind of complex narratives, contested frames, how narratives intersect and compete, and how they pull against each other, and looking at examples. You can look at examples through gender and sex, you can look at it through race, you can look at it through multiple forms of identities. I guess it's not a complete answer, but it's a one way of thinking about this, right? One way in is to realize that we all contain multitudes. I sometimes say this with my team when we're working on power. I say, I am a white, I don't know how this translates to America, by the way, but I'll just say it in a British way, right? So I am a white, highly educated, Oxbridge lawyer who has massive privilege in my life. That is true. That is me. I'm also an Irish to the UK, Irish immigrant, Catholic, state school, so public school educated woman who has experiences that me too. And that is part of my identity. And for me, when I am working with narrative, public narrative, there is no one truth. What I am trying to do is to create stories that allow people to feel safe and included enough to hear difference. So if you're able to find stories that are from your experience, that speak to moments when you've realized that somebody isn't so different, moments when something has taken you by surprise, and the more specific you can be, the better. And then just to use those stories, but to offer them, and offer them lightly. What people choose to do with the stories that we offer is really a matter for them, but to offer them lightly as an invitation to take a view of the world and tilt it 5 degrees. So that's really the power of a story. It's, great novelists will say that the power of public narrative and stories is that we feel less alone. That's why we read. We read to feel less alone. I think the same is true in public narrative, that it's through the specific details of my experience. The paradox is we can find the general, the universal, that connects us to something of what it is to be human. So the more, and this is a paradox, the more specific you can be in sharing stories that speak to some of those themes, but are really personal, not private, but personal to things you've seen and experienced, the easier it is for people to see something universal. And I know that sounds like a paradox. We kind of need longer to unpick it, really, Kristen. But there's a deep wisdom in that paradox, I think.
I'm gonna thank you so much, Kathryn. And is there another piece that you see on the Google Doc? Otherwise, I'm just gonna invite somebody to come off mic. So you saw something, I saw something. You know, this is all about fairness. You saw something, I saw something. Now let's see what the community says.
Let's do that.
Okay, let's see what the community wants to bring. We'll have time for one more, and it can be an insight. It doesn't have to be a question. Again, we're all trying to do the best with what we've got.
If no one wanted to say anything, I wanted to say something. I was really taking, I wanted to, Kathryn Presser, I'm in Texas, Bastrop. Offer stories lightly. I'm just so taken by that, because whenever I share a story, I think in my mind, A, no one cares, but B, if I share it, I want somebody to get something. And I'm just so taken by, no, lay it out there. It will land if it lands. It will not land if it doesn't land. Share it. And wow, it's such a simple concept, but thank you. What it says speaks volumes. And I just wanted to honor that thought. That was just well, there's been many, many fabulous nuggets today, but that one was one that you shared lightly and it landed greatly. Thank you very much.
I hope maybe it takes some pressure off as well, you know, because I'm going to come back full circle in response to what I heard you say, which is, I started off by saying public narrative is about how we influence for change, not how we mandate it. You know, and so often in organizations and services and companies, we think through linear structures, we think through mandate and authority and role. This is different. So if what we're doing is seeking to just influence, and influencing, if you think of the iceberg, right, the kind of classic iceberg, influencing below the waterline, right? Not what we see happening, but what people are thinking and feeling, their cultures, their attitudes, their assumptions. Stories give us the ability to sink down below that waterline. But we can't really, because all of us are subject to what is below that waterline. It has us and we're swimming in it. We can't ourselves really know fully what's happening there. So when we offer a story, I partly say we offer it lightly because it's too much to expect that people will understand and respond in the way that we may think is right, or, you know, this is deep work. It's deep, and it's offering something that connects right down in the core of our values. And so many of those values come from experiences in our formative years, our early adolescence, our childhood, our first years in work, in life, in love, in relationship. And so all we can do really is offer them.
Right.
In the hope and the expectation that they may be helpful.
Well, thank you, Kathryn Pressler, for coming off mic. It made me realize I would really love to close in a couple of ways. If you have a nugget that you're taking away, please type it into the chat. We want to share. It's like panning for gold. So if you picked up something, some phrase, like I picked up movement, emotion, motion, like there's something that Kathryn Perera said earlier that's sitting with me, please put it in the chat now. I'm also going to put an end of session feedback form in the chat. And if you can give us, some of you may have seen on my new signature line, feedback is love. Like, I believe that. I can't be a good mom if I don't get feedback from my daughter on, like, ouch, that I said that in a hurtful way, or it felt really bossy pants. I can't be a good neighbor if people don't talk to me. I can't be a good weaver. I can't be a good weaver consultant. So I can't be better if people don't hold a mirror and say, are you sure he wanted to do that in that way? So please tell us what you thought of this. We're really just asking about, did it help you connect? Did it help you learn? And did it help you grow? Then for those of you on this call, and spread the word through your grapevine, we'll do another one of these in the last week in October. And it will be with somebody in the US, because we've done the UK this month. We'll do the US and then we'll go back over to the UK. So please be in touch with me if you're willing to volunteer. We'll probably do it when I'm on site in Texas. So I'm looking for somebody, if somebody wants to host me, we'll see if we can do a COVID-friendly virtual tour or virtual conversation with barbecue. For those of you that are out of town, we'll just like waft the, barbecue aroma to you, or the vegetarian options to you. And then lastly, let me put a couple of resources. And those of you in the UK know how to get a hold of me. Those in Texas, I hope do. And those of you that don't know how to get a hold of me, I'll stay on the line and you can just say, like, how do I get plugged in? It doesn't have to be to talk to me. It has to be to know, where do I find some of these future conversations, or I want to shape a future conversation. Kathryn sent she sent a pre-read, which I'm going to put in the chat now. It's super interesting. And again, especially given what came up today around power, like how do we understand power when we're in the middle of structures that have held power in certain ways, when we're trying to organize and unleash power and voices. Leslie Goodburn, I'm going to say you're on for November. I'm just putting you on the spot. You're back to the UK one, because I want you to share how you use sketch notes and done all your creating of a network around power, voice, and narrative. You can't run away from me. Are you going to smile?
It'll be all American and click.
Oh yeah, do the click thing. Do the hug thing.
I can only do the action, I don't make the noise.
Okay, no stress. All right, babes, we're at the top of the hour. Please, I'm going to stay on a little bit longer. I want to say a few things in closing. Kathryn Perera had never met me before today. She was bold and open and loving and generous. I'm going to get weepy for sharing herself and something that has such heart for her and what she's seen that's been of service to the world. So I am unbelievably grateful for you for your courage and your just willingness to, we don't have to be perfect. We just have to like put it out there lightly. I've learned a ton. I think we'll keep learning tons if we do this work cross-culturally, because sometimes we can't talk about what we're in the middle of in our own communities. It's too sensitive. We can't see it. So we can listen each other into wholeness. And you helped me do that today. Have a beautiful, beautiful day. Somebody from the US has to be in touch with me, or it's going to be like a game. I'm going to tag you for the end of October, and then come back and invite your friends for the end of November, and you'll hear Leslie's unbelievable story. So, and thanks for the nuggets. Keep putting those nuggets in. Feel free to come off and say goodbye if you want to wave too. We'll miss you when you're gone. I miss you already, Caroline. Nice to see you today.
You too.
Jill Struby, I haven't seen you forever. Take care of yourself. Yay, Trish. Yay, Leanne. Thank you for coming. Kathryn, yay. Sophia's a precious gem. Learned so much from her. Andreas, I've never met you before. Was it useful? He's not sure.
Oh, yes, it was useful. It was
Okay,
very interesting. Thank you.
come back, please. We want to play some fiddle music. That's in our history. Oh, and I didn't say that. I guess about Kathryn, I would say too, like what a weaver does well is acknowledge the history that this comes from. So for her to say sketch notes were done by so-and-so, which was done by Marshall Gantz, which was done by Rabbi Hillel, like the current dominant culture in the US makes people think like, oh, this was just created and I did it. No, it comes from many generations back, and we need to attribute where we can. And if we can't attribute, we need to say, I don't know. If somebody knows, please tell me. So that was another deep practice that Kathryn did, which should not be taken for granted. We are who we are because of all those that came before, and they need to be acknowledged, especially many people who haven't received attention for the brilliant phrases or brilliant talents. So. All right. Oh, Elizabeth's here. Now I'm seeing who is at the party. Trish is here. Letha, I'm going to help her with her phone. Letha, why don't I put my phone number? Can you see my phone number, Letha? And can you see the chat?
No, ma'am. I can see